Wonderful. Welcome everybody to the CEDA presentation on AI as a force for good. It's such a fascinating topic to be thinking about as we're now all working virtually. It's certainly accelerated the idea of the importance of how we will be potentially working in the future. And we have some fantastic experts that are going to be able to give us an assessment of exactly what situation we're in now and how we can drive to enable artificial intelligence to be a force for good. As we know, there's both the technical aspects and the community-based aspects that we need to consider when we think about what it will take to shape our point of view on it. So we'll be looking forward to answering any questions from the audience, and we've got more than 450 people joining us today, so it's a topic that is of significant interest. So I'm delighted to be able to present Lee Hickin as the first speaker. Over to you, Lee.
Thanks, Katherine. Appreciate the intro and the time to share in this conversation, which I think is really an important conversation to kind of really rebuild that narrative around AI as a force for good. So, look, I just wanted to share a few points from my perspective. And first of all, we talk a lot about AI, and I think we need to break apart the ideas of artificial intelligence and machine learning, because there's a difference to the two. When we think about AI as that artificial version of the human intelligence experience, so talking, listening, understanding, and taking context from data. And then machine learning is that sort of the engine that fuels AI, and machine learning is driven by complex sets of data, rich models and tools and frameworks. And I think when we get to this AI as a force for good, that implies as a force for evil on the other side of that. And I think it's where we get into this darker side of artificial intelligence, the unknown black box side of machine learning that probably leads to some of that public mistrust. So for me, in the area I want to touch on is three areas where I see AI as a force for good, when we initially, we recognize its potential, but also understand its limitations. And I'll explore that in a bit more detail. We look to apply AI in the areas of society where there is the greatest need. And that's about really refocusing our efforts to solve those big problems in our communities, in our states, in our countries, and then globally. And then lastly, AI as a force for good comes to life when we think about sharing and open data frameworks, the data that feeds AI. And that's probably one of the biggest limitations and opportunities that I see today in the AI development in country and globally. So let me quickly look through those three pieces. If we start with the potential and the limitations, if you'll indulge me for a second, I'll sort of take a very Microsoft perspective here, because this is an area that we've long fought for, and my role as the National Technology Officer is also the lead as our responsible AI champ for Australia. So I take a personal responsibility for ensuring that the AI solutions we work on and we deliver and we develop are considered around an ethical and principled framework, and fundamentally underpinned by this idea that AI needs to be democratized. So if AI is going to be used for good, then everybody needs to have access to AI. It needs to be equitably distributed, trusted by all, done in an ethical way, and largely understood. And so we drive this program of democratization of AI, which is about making sure that AI is not just locked up in complex, deep, rich, difficult tools that only data scientists and those that have access to high-end compute and services can access, but it's really more equitable and available to all through the development of more flexible and usable tools that we all have, potentially the capability to use. And then flip with that is this investment in skills. And again, typically skills from an AI perspective are very focused on, the sort of scientific, analytical, and mathematical side of it. But there's a huge opportunity, if AI is going to be used for good, to invest in leadership skills around AI. How do our boards, how do our ministers, how do those who operate and run services really understand the ethical capabilities, the constraints, and thought process that goes into AI? Because it's very different to any other technology. It has an opportunity to deliver not just absolute answers. It gives us ranges of answers. AI is not about absolutes, it's about probability, and that's an important differentiation. And so whilst we're making really great strides in artificial intelligence and machine learning models, there's a limitation in the data that we feed these models with. Often it's old, often it's driven by biases that were relevant at the time of the data capture. And the biggest issue we're seeing today is this construct around data drifting, is as you teach AI with a data set, it learns, and then as it learns, different data comes in and it changes its perspective based on that data. So you end up with this drifting issue in the data. And then, of course, there's a really big underpinning issue here, which I've been reading about myself a lot lately, which is the difference between red and green AI. Red AI, heavy compute, spend whatever money you need to computate the outcome, versus green AI, how do we get optimized on the models and the thinking so we're reducing our carbon impact through the development of AI? A couple of interesting areas there. So interesting to balance those potentials and limitations. Then if we think about where do we apply it in society for the greatest need, this has been something that I've been thankfully very involved in projects around biodiversity in Kakadu here in Australia, tools and services to use AI to impact social problems. So how do we manage job creation, accessibility and inclusivity for all that need to get access to it? And AI is a fantastic tool to create human-like experiences in computer tools to enable those that have limited hearing or limited sight to access services that they previously couldn't. So it's how do we apply it in those ways? And our latest innovation, or our latest approach, is the biology of this, the planetary computer vision. How do we bring together all of the data sets that we have around the world that underpin our challenges around understanding climate change and put them into a place where we can actually start to use data and AI to impact those large global scale challenges? But fundamentally, the areas where we need to apply AI, from my view, is where we have the most impact on people: healthcare, social services, sustainability, and agriculture. And then lastly, it's that challenge that I mentioned, is the sharing of the data. If we're going to use AI as a force for good, we have to get better at understanding the value of sharing data, and not just data, but good data, rich data, and labeled data. These labeled data sets are going to be key in us building better AI and therefore building better trust in AI. There's a challenge for that in the private sector because there's always commercial boundaries around sharing data. We see some great examples in the agriculture industry where they're sort of cooperatively sharing weather data and localized weather data for broader understanding of weather patterns. And governments around the world are largely seeing the importance of data and the value in that data, but the process of sharing it is, I guess, still fairly early on. We've seen some good examples in Finland and Malta and their approach to data innovation. Here in Australia, I think we're in the early stages. Federal government's investing in central data governance and tools. Services Australia as an entity is a great agency to think about sort of the power of data to service citizens. And the state governments is establishing their own frameworks, the DAC here in New South Wales and others. I have to call out Victoria. If you've looked at the data on open data governance for Australia, Victoria is a standout state in terms of the amount of data that they've made publicly available. So, those for me are the 3 points. And I think if I was to set some seeds about what we need to do next, I think we need to broadly invest in facilitating experimentation. AI is often about experimentation to learn. So build safety frameworks in those key industries that are getting value from it: health, social services, and agriculture. Build the safety frameworks to let them learn and experiment without risk of sort of consequential failure. We need to continue investing in broad skills, as I said before, not just AI for technicians, but AI for business, for ministers, for leaders, and for boards. And ultimately, we do need to think about what a national and potentially international framework for legislation around AI to protect human rights as we get better at it and the data gets richer. We need to consider what that looks like. AI has the power to simplify all of these rich, difficult, complex problems that humans need to solve and want to solve. And we can empower more people to contribute to the problem. But in order to do that, we need accountability and transparency to maintain the trust that's needed. That's it from me. You're still on mute, Katherine, by the way.
Yeah, thanks. For those of you who are dying to ask a question, there's Pigeonhole. There's a Q&A link underneath the live stream window if you'd like to add your questions. Lee, I've got a couple of questions just on the concept that you're talking about in terms of sharing data. And data, if you're thinking about artificial intelligence, it's like one coin. Data is on one side and artificial intelligence is on another. As you're saying, essentially, we're relying on good data in order to have the best possible artificial intelligence outcomes.
Yep.
We've got a great example with COVID Safe, with 2 million Australians signing up and another 8 million either considering it or potentially if they've got the right telephones and technology, they're either holding back on a decision or deciding to go forward on it. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the importance of data as it relates to trust in this situation.
Look, a good example, and certainly, so from my point of view, I use the app. I've installed the app. I think it's important. I think there's a bigger problem to be addressed here, not to set aside people's concerns around privacy and data, but fundamentally we have a global health issue that we need to take an active participation in. But there's a number of things, and really not AI specific, but when we think about what that COVID safe tool is looking to do, it's looking to use data in its macro form on your device and how you interact with others to help provide you with a better understanding of your own health risks and health safety. So again, it's a very macro example because we're not talking about, as everyone should know and would understand, the COVID safe tool is not about large data aggregation. It's about tracking and managing of that data in to sort of these areas where it may pop up and giving you immediacy of that awareness. But again, it's a good example how data is really underpinning an intelligent decision. Data is what's going to enable the services, yourself to be safer, the health services to better serve you, and the government to better open up and facilitate our ability to kind of return to normal, because data is going to unlock that. So yeah, it is a good example, but probably not a large scale data and AI problem. A good example of data at use.
It's a good example of people interacting with a decision around whether they trust government with the data as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, look, trust is obviously the underpinning conversation, whether you read Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever you get your news from. There's always this conversation of, do I trust it? And I think that, there's been lots of work to understand, deconstruct the application, and I'm not going to dive into that. But at the end of the day, it's a combination of building trust in the government, building trust in the application, but also building trust in the capability of the tools to help you, get access to the life we want to get back to.
Wonderful. Okay, well, that's a great point to now bounce off to our next speaker. Sean, if I can bring you in now, we're looking at working from home, and this is your specialty around how we might think about the future of work. So over to you, Sean.
Thanks very much, Katherine. It's great to be here. I hope you're all having a great time working from home wherever you are. It's certainly challenging at our end here. I wanted to talk to you about, clearly about AI, but really taking it from what the impact is going to be on people. And so there are two dimensions I want to speak to you about. One is the impact on work, and the second is the impact on learning. And they're actually both sides of the same coin. So from a work perspective, let's look at the demand side of the workout of the workforce, of the labor market. So most work in most organizations today is routine and predictable tasks. And because it's routine, that means it can be codified. And that means it's actually, it's a possibility that algorithms could be written, and particularly with increasing amounts of better and better data. And so those algorithms can be turned into AI. We're seeing AI disrupt work in two ways, task-based work in two ways. The first is that AI is displacing tasks where AI is actually doing the work. Think about call centers, chatbots, all the way through to cancer diagnosis. The key thing here is that no matter how menial or sophisticated the work, if it's routine and predictable, it's vulnerable to being displaced by an AI. Fathom, which is a future of work software as a service based in Sydney, they're sort of modeling that 22% of jobs in Australia are going to be impacted by AI over the next 5 years. But the second thing that AI does in terms of work is it reorganizes work to lower cost labor solutions. So in this case, think of gig and freelancing or dark kitchens. And work that the center that I run has done has shown that at the moment, 1.2 million Australian workers are actually doing some form of gig and freelance work. Now, none of that liquidity, that online digital market would work if it wasn't for AI. Flipping to education now, so that's the supply side, if you like, of the labor market. And where tasks were relevant to work, skills are relevant to talent. So skills are kind of like the supply side counterpart to tasks. AI is being increasingly widely used in education and helping people learn better. And in fact, doing a little bit more research for our time today, I'm blown away by how AI is baked in almost everywhere in terms of higher education. But we're using it, in particularly on the skills side, to better understand the skills we need as workers as the economy continues to transform. So there's two dimensions I'll focus on here. One is on the micro level, and how AI is helping to personalize learning journeys by seeing the history of what a single person has done and sort of mapping out and creating a personalized learning journey for them. And likewise with skills gaps, if understanding where they want to go, AI can predict the gaps in the skills that they have, but also suggest learning that they need to take on to be able to be better qualified for various jobs or career paths, whatever they want to choose. But the second is on the macro level, and that's across the economy. AI is going through reams and reams of data and is helping identify different skills families that are required for certain professions and careers. But most importantly, it's getting better and better at predicting. So skills forecasting to identify where skills are going to evolve. And one of the things that, and this is a segue, I think, to the human side for me, and one of the modeling that AI is showing is in terms of increasing skills is that humans need increasingly this leveraging their social competencies in work, and almost at the expense of operational skills. Now, the important thing here is that this actually, to me, this brings up a much more profound question of what is the role of the human worker in increasingly digital environments, particularly where AI is becoming, as I said, baked in everywhere? Well, if you think back to before these digital technologies, knowledge and expertise was our human competitive advantage. It was our expertise in knowing existing knowledge and applying it to problems, task-based work. But that's exactly what digital technologies, largely driven by AI, is getting good at. And so in the digital world, the role of the human needs to become more human. So increasingly, it's leveraging our social competencies, our emotional and entrepreneurial skills, collaborative, and so forth, as well as increasingly higher level technical skills. The two dimensions I want to talk about here are, first of all, it's how does a human work with AI? Well, first of all, it's our mastery of AI. How do we augment our expertise to lift ourselves to operate and at higher and higher levels of capability? At my university, for example, law is one of the areas that is most under threat from AI. So our university is teaching law students how to learn to code and program AI in order to use it to analyze vast data sets for a particular legal task. But the second is, I think it's also about the purpose of work and learning is changing. Humans are we need to do things that technology can't. We're good at navigating complexity. We're good at seeing over the horizon. And, not only can we do that, we can identify patterns and create compelling narratives. And I think that's the essence of where an increasingly AI workplace will be, is seeing that humans are focused much more on creating new knowledge and new value. Thanks, Katherine.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sean. While we're waiting for some questions to come through, I might just sort of zero in a little bit on the way that the human becomes more human. The skill sets that I've heard about are things like problem solving and collaboration and being more agile around how we think. What are the changes that you think need to happen in our education system for us to be able to shape our children into being ready for that future of work?
I think number one, we need to celebrate curiosity. It is fundamental to everything that we face. Currently, and perhaps a complement to that is also ensure that we encourage risk-taking. You know, schools and universities should be safe spaces for taking intellectual risks. This is the incubator. This is the crucible that, you know, we develop our people before we send them out into the big wide world. So it should be a place in which we set up experiments and opportunities for our students to explore and to the verbs that we very rarely use with respect to learning: experiment, investigate, explore, as opposed to collect and analyze and come up with a solution. So celebrate problems, be curious, and trying to as I said, allow risk-taking to take place, because we're in a world right now where there's unprecedented complexity and uncertainty. Everything we do is about taking a risk. We need to get comfortable being outside our comfort zone. So focusing on curiosity, I think, is a good place to start.
That's great. Thank you very much. It really does speak to the importance of a growth mindset around this, doesn't it? Where we open ourselves up to that. I'd like to introduce our next speaker now, who to some extent has almost a different challenge. It's a specialty in health and AI, where I imagine most people, as they go towards their health specialist, doesn't want a whole lot of risks being taken. Michelle, I'd like to introduce you and bring you into the conversation.
Thank you so much, Katherine, and thank you to the organisers and sponsors of this event. I think it's a really important topic. I've heard a lot of really great introductory terms from the other speakers, which I'll elaborate on as well. A couple of those are trust, the narrative around AI, and the utility of AI to ensure its ethical application, I think, are some of the key terms that I'll bring in. And the healthcare sector is actually quite unique because it is a highly regulated industry already, and it actually already operates under a very strong risk and regulatory framework. So in some ways, I see the healthcare framework being really reminiscent of how AI is going to be regulated into the future. But what I wanted to do is I'll give you a little bit of background about what I do, because it's quite interesting. It touches on all these issues around data, and then I'll go into a bit of a detailed view of what I think some of the core issues that are holding back AI actually being applied in real life. So in the healthcare sector, my company, Presagen, we are all about building scalable AI medical products, and we have a focus in the women's health sector. Our first product is called Life Whisper, and it's definitely an example, a real life example of AI for good, I believe. We are using AI to analyse embryo images during the IVF process. So if you're an infertile patient and you go in for an IVF treatment, currently what happens is the doctor needs to visually analyse your embryo images and pick one to transfer back in the hope that that embryo results in a pregnancy. That's a very difficult decision for a human to do. They're limited by what they can see down a microscope. And what we've built is a software application that's very simple, augments that decision process for the embryologist. So it allows them to drag and drop images of the patient embryos directly onto a web app. And within about 10 seconds, all of those images are analysed by AI in the cloud to give an assessment of which embryo they should transfer to the patient. Shortens the time to pregnancy, reduces the cost for patients for their IVF treatment, reduces the trauma of the IVF treatment process, and for clinics, it's fabulous because it increases their success rates and allows them to service more patients. Definitely an example of AI for good, but very difficult to commercialise these applications in the healthcare sector. And we've come up with a whole range of different considerations and challenges that are going to be reminiscent not only on AI development in healthcare, but also more generally in other industries. And some of those challenges that I see kind of fall into two different classes. One is around the actual building of the AI, and Lee touched upon this in terms of data privacy, in terms of ownership of data, actually being able to have access to data. The inherent biases that exist within data sets is a huge consideration here. And one of the big challenges that we've had to overcome, and many others will also, and it's one of the things that's limiting the practical application of AI, is the access to good quality data. Now, what happens is in the healthcare sector, there's a lot of restrictions around data privacy and sharing data. So how then do you build an effective, scalable AI that is built on a diverse enough data set if you can't move data from different countries and different clinical environments into a central location to build the AI? Very difficult. There's data privacy considerations, there's data ownership issues, who owns the data, how willing are they to give that data, and for what use are you using that data? So there's a whole range of issues that come up in the healthcare sector that will also become relevant in other industry sectors that are looking to build the AI. So I think the second side is how does that AI actually get used, and how do we monitor and measure whether it's being utilised in the right way? Never mind the testing and the validation, but making sure that we're actually using it for things that create societal or economic value to our economy and our society within our country, but even globally. And how do we ensure that we've got the right frameworks in place in order to be able to manage that risk? And I think everything in the conversation around AI is premised around risk and trust. And I think some of the work that the government's doing around the AI ethics framework is touching upon the need to put in place a risk framework and a strategy to understand how data is being utilised, for what purposes it's being collected, how that data is being protected, both in terms of its development of the AI, but then also utility. But also, I think there's this big piece around education of society around the potential of AI to positively improve things like healthcare outcomes, things like education, agriculture. All of these different industries have an enormous potential for AI to really have a positive impact. But there needs to be that protective risk framework and the right narrative that allows people to understand exactly how their data is being used, for what purpose, and for the greater good of the society in general. So I'll leave it there, and I'm sure there's going to be many questions from the panel as we go through around data privacy and other issues that I've raised, and I'm happy to answer any questions throughout the course of the webinar.
Thanks so much, Michelle. We have a great question from an audience member, which directly links to your comment that you've made in relation to risk and trust and how we can make sure it's protected. The question is around AI in the cloud and what are the major issues for privacy, cyber threats, and data transfer. And the question was, isn't AI on the edge and the future of AI therefore also on the edge?
It's a really good question. It's a huge issue, and it's one that we've personally had to overcome through innovating within our own company. So in order to overcome that issue, we built a decentralized AI training system that, instead of bringing all the data together in one location, which is a huge risk, it points to massive data privacy issues, sharing that data into a central location outside of country of interest, for example. We've developed an AI system that can actually iteratively learn from globally distributed data sets without ever moving the data. So it looks at the data, it learns from it, it moves to the next data set, and then it builds an AI as if it had seen a global data set. So that's one type of innovation. AI on the edge is another one that mitigates the need to have kind of that cloud access for data storage. I think there's a lot of ways that we can ring fence what happens to the data in the cloud. AWS, for example, has HIPAA compliance, which is the US standard around privacy of healthcare data. There's a lot of cybersecurity measures that can be put in place that already regulate the utility of healthcare data. So I don't think people are necessarily all that aware of those structures that are already in place and are required in order to put out a healthcare product that collects data. But you can ring fence cloud servers within a particular location. You can put AI on individual servers within hospitals. You can consider technologies like AI on the edge. So I think the technology's there. I think the approach needs to change. I think people need to, or the developers of the AI need to be cognizant that people are not comfortable sharing and moving their data into a big central repository. And I think it's going to drive a whole wave of innovation around how we overcome overcome some of those trust issues. And instead of just forcing people to trust it, come up with unique ways of actually managing that risk around cyber and movement of private patient data.
Now, I'll drill in a little bit to the trust element, because trust has got a couple of different components. One of them is, what are the value sets that you are expressing when you work out what you want to be accountable for, what you need to build trust in. So I thought maybe I'd throw to the whole panel, starting with you, Michelle, on when it comes to the area you specialise in, what are the value sets that you think you need to be known for and most trusted in?
One of the biggest trust issues in the healthcare sector has come from people having a very, very data hungry attitude and an expectation that data is a central resource that should be utilised by all. I think that's the wrong approach. I think we need to start orienting the AI development towards solving practical real world problems, that people understand the challenges that can be solved using AI. And then we need to come to a kind of mid-level point where we analyse the issues, the risks and the trust element, and deliver something that's actually of utility to society such that they do trust it. And one of the great, and this is a very simple example, it's nothing to do with AI, but when you turn on your television, for example, at home, you don't know the inner workings of a television, right? All you know is that it's meant to be doing a certain thing. It's meant to show you a program on TV. You turn it on, it does what it is meant to do. I think it's all about testing. It's all about the application. It's all about understanding what is the AI meant to be doing, how is that risk reduced, and making sure that it's being applied to very specific areas, augmenting current processes with humans still in the loop. I think that is the way to establish trust initially. And then as we become more trusting of the technology and understand it better as consumers, we will inherently be more open to providing data and utility. But I think we've kind of overstepped the mark and gone too far, and we're asking people to, in a very uncomfortable environment with a lot of lack of knowledge, we're asking them to contribute their data where they're not comfortable doing so.
If I might, Katherine, I was holding my tongue. There's a lot of stuff I wanted to add to that, because I think Michelle made some excellent points. And I wouldn't question, her level of knowledge in the health sector far outweighs mine. But there are some key things. I mean, Michelle, you talked about humans in the loop, absolutely critical. AI as an augmentation of human process and skills as opposed to a replacement is sort of a very clear and consistent theme. And I think your point made, the risks that inherent or apparent or perceived in terms of putting data in the cloud in one single place. And obviously you'd expect, as the cloud vendor, I have a perspective on that. And I totally get the risk. And I think or at least the concerns, because the concerns often are a misunderstanding or misrepresentation of sometimes the capabilities and the mechanisms within those cloud technologies. But also, often what we're finding is that there's good reason to do data at scale in the cloud from a computational perspective. But to your point, AI at the edge, and so where we've kind of spent a lot of our time thinking about, is the execution of the AI. You want the AI to be applicable in a very immediate way, particularly in healthcare, in the hands of the doctor, the clinician, or the remote medical person in some way. So that's where the decision that the AI can make needs to be immediate on the edge, but there is value in the cloud. And it's something that we haven't solved yet, but we're working heavily on this idea of how do we build sharing models with governance controls? Because that's what's really needed. Is everybody wants to own and control their data. There's a huge risk in building data sets that light up new insights through metadata and intersection. So how do we do that, but then build a layer of governance? And that for us is where we're putting a lot of our effort in our AI work now, is not just in better models and faster models, but sharing, governance, policy, control, and ensuring that ownership is transactional and visible transparent to those that use it.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to ask a question direct to Sean from the audience. How can the federal government help drive new jobs in AI? And are there ways to spur this tech on to help an economic recovery and reduce unemployment?
Last year, Lee and a few of us across the country we went to a forum held by the Minister for Science and Innovation at the old Parliament House. And Minister Andrews wanted to better understand how AI can be used across Australia. And I thought it was a great day in terms of really getting some smart people, much smarter than me, in the room to understand where AI is going. And I think the two things that came out of this were the take homes were, we need a better communication campaign federally about the value and importance of AI. This isn't just to dispel concerns about ethics and privacy and so forth, but it's actually about to promote its potential and the value it can drive things. But the second thing that came out of the day was that the federal government, understandably to some extent, was looking at can AI solve our existing problems. And the room made the case quite strongly that AI can do much more than that. And it can actually focus on problems that we haven't yet begin to understand how to solve. So in other words, there's actually an aspiration piece tied to AI. And I think, how do we drive more people into becoming either AI technically competent? Well, I think it is about making the case for on the upside about what AI can do and help us create a better society. And on the micro level, universities like ours and many others, they are looking at ways of providing teaching coding skills to those that like lawyers and accountants and so forth, because their jobs are going to disappear if they don't figure out how to lift themselves to a higher level. And so perhaps in some respects it's a question of maybe a little bit of survival, but it's actually ensuring that the work of lawyers and accountants is actually more and more meaningful because they're focusing on higher value work. So there's both a federal piece in terms of making the case for AI and the value of it in society, but I also think our education institutions need to reimagine why we're producing graduates. What do those future jobs look like, and how can AI not compete with them but augment them?
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing some work around how you can help communities transition for the fourth industrial revolution, get their head around all the different elements of technology, including AI. And what opens up for me is the huge gap between some of the community that still feel very uncomfortable with the technology, and they just need this sort of basic education to help them navigate what it is, what it can do, how it can help them, and how they can be involved. And others are wanting to be entrepreneurial and move faster and evolve quickly. So this process of kind of lifting our base to get to the point where we can have a conversation around where the opportunity is that sort of where you're focusing your thinking around a communication campaign?
That's just some general comments from me. Where I'm focused more on a sort of a micro level at the firm level, and one of the ways in we're doing this is focusing on leadership. One of almost the biggest retardant of uptake of new technologies are the leadership of organizations. They're the older white-haired, if they have hair, males that have a particular view of the world, and they find these new technologies threatening because they don't understand them. Leadership is increasingly going to be about stepping back and empowering your younger generation workers and those that are willing to explore new problems, recognizing the value that they create, but then reorganizing the business around them. It's not that when you're CEOs used to have gone through every seat in the in the hierarchy to get to the corner office, but these days there are people that work in your organization that you have no idea. And so I think in terms of ensuring that we have a greater uptake of technology, it's leadership allowing those who have that expertise to pursue and to experiment. But the value of leadership is to listen and to watch and to recognize where there is value being created.
I saw a meme come out on LinkedIn that said, who has driven your digital transformation? Multiple choice. A, your CEO. B, your CTO. C, COVID-19. And it did speak to exactly that kind of challenge. I might throw to you, Michelle, just on the question of the health sector. Does the effective leadership impact on where you see the opportunities being, and where does Australia sit in terms of leadership of health AI?
I think we're regarded in the healthcare sector generally as quite advanced and quite, not heavily regulated, but considerate of the regulations and the governance that's required to kind of manage this type of sector. So I think that's going to put us in really good stead from an AI perspective as well. I think we are a little behind in terms of our investment into AI technologies, and we're certainly laggards in terms of uptake of new AI technologies. So our products that we work with are global. So we work in countries in, across Europe, UK, the US, Southeast Asia. It's very clear that we are more conservative in terms of our uptake, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think you want to be a little conservative to the extent that you're being considerate and putting the governance structures that Lee spoke about in place at a country level, but also to ensure that you're orienting your AI investment into the right areas where you can actually provide social and economic benefit to the country. So I think that's probably a good thing, but I think it's time for us to get started now, and we need to start sending out that narrative to the rest of the world that there is an immense amount of AI capability in this country. I mean, just in my hometown in Adelaide, we have, one of the top 3 computer vision institutes in the world, the Australian Institute of Machine Learning. We're not communicating that out globally, right? So this is all around the narrative. People will respect us. They'll respect Australia's governance structures. They'll respect our ability to be careful around the way that we utilise data and build AI products. But the narrative needs to be right, and those governance structures need to be put in place. And I think within organisations, it's about having that new, as Sean kind of alluded to, having that leadership who are open to kind of the creative influence that these technologies can have on businesses, and that are willing to drive them forward in a considered way to build kind of those next generation of applications or industries that we all know are possible with AI.
Thank you. Over to you, Lee. Just a question in relation to how you see with Microsoft's sort of global view on where Australia leads and lags. What are your thoughts of the challenges that we could be addressing to make it uptake faster?
Yeah, it's a good question. And actually, it relates to something both Sean and Michelle said. When Sean talked about the need for leadership to drive that, and the curiosity that needs to be a part of our educational system now. It's not about learning machine language and programming, although those are great skills. It's about having the curiosity to explore them as a potential for what they might do. And then on the flip side, Michelle talks about sort of the challenge that we have, I think, as a nation. There's just a general, apathy is too strong a word, but there's a sense of we just don't like taking risks. We're not a nation that is willing to experiment. And it's it's probably no surprise that a significant percentage, something in the region of sort of 20 to 25% of the startups that are moving to the US West Coast into Silicon Valley, California, are Australian startups. And Australian innovators, Australian thinkers. We have a great education system that nurtures these thinkers and these intelligent people that want to try and experiment, but we don't have an environment, I think, yet today that really fosters that at a commercial and an experimental layer. Now, we, like us and many other companies, we've invested in incubators and startup hubs in country, and that's great to try and keep them here. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, I think there's more we can be doing at a sort of a government incentive and an industry incentive, and just generally within the population, a willingness to look for those technologies. So I think, yes, I think I echo the points that everyone sort of said, and it's very relevant and very obvious.
Katherine, if I could just have a quick follow-up to what Lee has said, and I think this is a really, yes, having a startup is absolutely one way to drive innovation. But one of the programs that we have at the university at Swinburne is called Hire Apprentices, and they're Industry 4.0 experts. They're a strategic play for organization. This isn't just standard skills to do normal work. They're actually hired as change agents to infuse the organization with Industry 4.0 know-how, but also Industry 4.0 thinking as to way to do things. And so how do we, and this brings a question about generational diversity in the workforce. How do we value the experience of our older generation workers, yet at the same time empower our younger workers increasingly as change agents, because they see the future in a way that older generation workers don't?
Yeah, I echo that. We did a workshop on Fourth Industrial Revolution in a community, and one of the younger people came over to me at the end and said, "Oh, I'm so relieved." And I said, "Relieved? What was your concern?" She said, "I was so worried about the older people and whether they could make the transition. And now I'm just delighted to see that they're going to be able to." So it's a great idea to have young people do that and to be empowered as change agents. A question from the audience for the panel. What do you think the competitive advantage of AI-based products and services are? Is it all about target application and having access to the right data? What differentiates one type of AI from another?
I might just throw a comment out there because I'm pretty sure Michelle will have a strong view on this, given the work she does. Look, to me, it's fundamentally, it's down to a couple of things. It's your ability to do more with less. It's that optimization of your process and your data. And it's kind of if you think about this idea of this, like a digital feedback loop, when you're using AI and intelligence and data-driven services, when your customer deals with you, that creates a piece of data that feeds the way in which you optimize your product, which feeds the way in which you evolve your services and solutions, and you're constantly moving so much faster that traditional industry and business providers just can't keep up. So for me, I see that as being the key thing. But Michelle, you might want to have a different view of it or another crack.
No, I totally agree. I think that is key. But I think the how do you say, the challenge, or one of the key advantages that I see of AI is basically scale. So it's not necessarily about accuracy, even in the clinical space, not about accuracy of diagnoses. It's not about clinical efficiency necessarily, although that's a big part of it. It's actually about scale, because if you can do something at scale that would normally be inhibited by a single person doing it who doesn't have the time to do it, or a repetitive task if you're trying to automate something, if you can do that at scale effectively, then what ends up happening is that the utility or the application that AI feeds into will be much cheaper for consumers. It will allow us to be much more productive. It will allow us greater efficiencies within the workplace. And to Sean's point, it will allow greater creativity of thought. And I think that's kind of where we're oriented to. It's augmenting some of those really manual, laborious things that either can't be done at scale as a human, or can't be done effective, or shouldn't be done by a human because they're just too mundane. And there's better things that we could be doing with our creative brains that AI can't do. So I think scale is the main advantage that AI offers.
Another question which links directly to that. Evidence suggests economic downturns bring higher levels of automation. Post-COVID, what industries do you envision this being apparent in, and do you foresee larger firms being better placed to benefit? Shall I start with you, Sean?
Yeah, I think the answer on both of those levels is yes. EY has just put out a study of senior execs of companies across all continents. 40% report that they're accelerating their plans to automate. The key thing with, and so in terms of industries, I think it's the high cost industries. I expect that even though there's a move towards more manufacturing and more advanced manufacturing, that automation, which is largely driven by AI and certainly and robotics, there may be an increase in those industries, but there may not be the jobs that go along with it unless it's very highly technically, highly technical skills. And the RBA also put out a report, I think last year it was, and they showed that basically only wealthy companies are able to invest in automation and AI because of the cost of these technologies, which means that we're bifurcating a lot of sectors in that the winners become even more efficient and more productive because of their technologies, whereas those that cannot afford it can't afford to invest in those productive measures, and that self-reinforces their position down the bottom. So there's absolutely those who can afford to invest in technology are doing it, and they're reaping the rewards.
Lee, that goes to an earlier comment you made about the importance of diversification of access. What do you think can be done about this?
Yeah, no, I was sort of just thinking that as Sean was talking. I don't disagree with the points that Sean's making in terms of that. There's a definite potential and risk for that to happen because, the haves that can have more and the have-nots can have no access to. And so this is kind of why that, I think, particularly in AI, and if we kind of get back to this kind of construct of how is AI going to be a force for good in the world, what Sean just described is AI as a force for evil, the perpetuation of this, of the wage gap, of the economy gap, of the differentiation in society. So democratization of tools and services, making AI something that and forgive me, Michelle, if I use you in the incorrect way, but allowing small businesses that are starting up to use AI to differentiate themselves in the market by making those tools easy to use, accessible, doesn't require high-cost data science resources to simply get you started, and there's an element of the ability to experiment with it. Those are the kinds of mechanisms that will enable that sort of middle tier and to bridge the gap between sort of the top and the bottom of those pillars. It's not perfect, and of course it requires those organizations to know about that opportunity, to go to that opportunity and to seek it out and to work with it and to have the skills to even think that way. But that's fundamentally what we need to do is, and that's kind of the great democratizer of cloud computing, of AI, of data access, is that if we make these things available to everyone, then a small startup in Kenya can develop a great healthcare platform in the same way that a company in Silicon Valley can do it because they have access to the same resources. That's the vision, at least, and that's where I think we want to get to.
Thank you. I mean, Michelle, give us your experience of it. It'd be great to hear.
I do have a little bit of a different view. I think it's incredibly expensive to build AI products that actually get practically implemented. I think it is out of the realms of affordability for many different companies. And in fact, I would argue that those companies shouldn't be doing it anyway because it's not their core expertise and it's probably a poor way to orient not every company needs to have its own AI or automation function at the moment. I think that's changing over time, and as the technologies become more mainstream and more easy to use, then that will obviously change. But I'm going to come back to scale again as a means of describing the access point, because I think scale actually is increasing the access to low-cost AI on the demand side. And I'll give you an example. So in the IVF sector where we operate with our first product, Life Whisperer gets utilised in the cloud by any patient, any clinic, anywhere in the world, right? Very low cost proportion of their overall IVF treatment, and it can save them thousands of dollars by not needing a repeat treatment. The only way that works is through economies of scale of the AI. If the AI is truly scalable, you can deliver it at very low cost and consumers can access it at very low cost. I think that's the main benefit of kind of AI at the moment. And within businesses, it's a little bit of a different story, because if you're talking about kind of overhauling and automating your own services, then that can be quite an expensive, challenging process that can only be done by those larger companies potentially. But I think the smaller companies almost have an advantage because they're a bit more agile and they're more able to work in different innovative solutions within their workflows to integrate more easily some of these new age technologies. So I think that access issue, I think access is available to AI on the consumer side, on the large organisations and small organisation side. I think it just gets consumed in a different way for a different purpose. But I think access will increasingly improve as we kind of get more mainstream with how the technologies are applied.
Okay, thank you. Sean, do you have a view on that?
No, we can go to the next question.
Great, all right. So there's a couple more questions that I'd like to squeeze in before the end. The first one is around government frameworks being developed. The question is, where do you see the most important work being done and who's involved? Start with you, Sean.
Oh, I might handball this to the others, given that they're focused more at a macro level than me.
Okay, Lee?
Yeah, I'll certainly give a viewpoint, and as Sean alluded to earlier, I mean, we've been involved in work in what was the Department of Innovation, Industry and Science, leading that with Minister Karen Roberts. So we're seeing that. For me personally, I do a lot of work with the CSIRO and Data 61, and I think they're doing a tremendous amount of work from the scientific research and kind of innovation space, which is great to see. I think, look, as I mentioned earlier, you've got at a federal level, we've got Department of Innovation, Industry, Science, and what it's called now, I forget now, leading the way in kind of thought leadership around the frameworks and the policy of AI. We've got CSIRO and Data 61 driving the sort of the mechanics and the technicalities of it. And for me, I'm seeing customer service in South Wales, Services Australia, and we're starting to see this pop up in other states as well at a sort of customer service level. Huge investments and interest and willingness to dive into data and AI as mechanisms to deliver better citizen services. So I think it's pretty broadly there across a lot of government sectors.
And there's also the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission's work being done too.
Yeah, well, look, and what you've got there is that great balance of, you've got the Human Rights sort of Services Commission thinking about this from with the importance and the impacts of civil and human rights globally and as well as nationally. You've got the government thinking about citizen life journeys and how does AI and the data we have now make those journeys better, cheaper, more affordable, and more accessible. And hopefully you will certainly have, from our perspective, you've got industry, academia, and other segments of the society wanting to participate for no cost. We want to be involved because we think we have not just the capabilities to, but I think broadly speaking, and certainly I speak for Microsoft, we have a responsibility to be part of that discussion and to contribute what we can, because we're all Australians. We all live here in the country and use those services as anyone else does. Okay,
well, it links to a question from one of our participants here. Will high levels of social trust or low levels of consent become a competitive advantage between countries in artificial intelligence? Start with you, Lee.
Yes.
Okay, good, yes. Sean.
Yes.
I think it's hard to say. You look at China. China is investing more in AI than the rest of the world combined by several factors. So, it's sort of that competitive advantage sort of washes away when you look at what they're actually doing in China. So I'm not sure that it may be true in some markets, but maybe not globally.
Okay. Do you have a view, Michelle?
I think, yes, I agree with Lee, but I also think that it may become a competitive advantage, but not to the extent that you would need data sharing and data utility to build scalable products. Again, because those need to cut across different demographics, different borders, and having one country provide data is not enough to build scalable AI that's global. So yes, I think internal to those countries it will provide a competitive advantage, but I think the world will move towards global contribution of data in order to build actually truly effective scalable AI.
It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation with our expert panelists. Thank you so much, everybody. The themes that come out are very rich, but you've got the idea of how we evolve trust and citizen engagement and entrepreneurial engagement and frameworks that we can know and understand in order to create scalable, accessible artificial intelligence that can be a force for good globally, and some great ideas about some immediate steps that people can take to understand it a little bit better, look for the opportunities and look for how it could be scaled and led inside your organization. And the message of get out of the way of your young people and actually help them drive some change management internally is a resounding one, not just, I guess, inside an organisation, but also inside our country. It'd be great to have a process of participation with the youth of Australia around what the force for good might be and what they would need to drive us to be a competitive nation on artificial intelligence, so that some of the areas that have been talked about today no longer become laggards or restrictions from us being able to grow out of this. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers and our participants. Thank you for joining CEDA in its 60th year, and appreciate your involvement.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being involved. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.